And let's try to crack the MCQ. So from here, I'm going to do a sectional analysis of MCQs and FRQs. So for the MCQs, you have 60 questions to solve within 90 minutes. Each question has a stimulus. This is very similar to the world history exam where each question is followed by a stimulus. So for each stimulus, you'll be having a question or three or four questions, two questions. I cannot guarantee that, but do know that each question is followed by a stimulus. Usually the stimulus is a long description that you would hate to read, a graph, a lab data, or a diagram. Let's just see in the example here, we see that for the question, there is a diagram of a DNA segment sequence. Ooh, difficult to read. You will be mastering this towards the end of this coursework. So by reading the stimulus, you essentially should understand what this question is trying to get at. So after reading the stimulus, you should be like getting, this question is testing me on this, on that. So for example, once I just, read the stimulus, I should be getting that this is testing me about the molecular basis of DNA, RNA, okay? So always, it is very important to fully understand the stimulus in order to understand the question's point, all right? That's I'll say pretty much the first step to getting an MCQ question correct. Understanding the stimulus and understanding what this question is trying to test you on through this stimulus. And after you understand the stimulus and the question's point, think MCQ as the FRQ. This is actually what students who usually end up with a 5 do. So after reading the stimulus and after reading the question, so they will get the question's point, right? So they'll understand what this question is trying to ask me. They'll try to think, how would I answer this as an FRQ question? Okay, so they'll try to think in their head. The answer would be roughly this, okay? If it were to be FRQ, I would, likely write in this fashion. And they would go on to find the question choice that best represents their prediction, what is going on in their head, all right? That's how you choose the answer. Generally, the students that like miss two or three on the MCQ section, which is awesome, they usually do that. They always think in their head, how would they answer it as an FRQ? And they just pick the choice that best represents your prediction. This is usually important for the AP Bio exam because all answer choices actually make sense. Okay, thinking of and speaking of scientifically and biologically, each answer choice can potentially make a chance. That means that you have to choose the best one out of these distractors. So this approach of thinking how you would answer this question as an FRQ and then choosing the question choice that best resembles it is the best practice that you could do to avoid yourself from being confused by those distracting answer choices that actually makes sense scientifically. And one another thing to highlight is that the time pacing for MCQ is very tight. So you have 60 minutes, no, sorry, 90 minutes to solve 60 questions. For each question, there is a stimulus. You need a time to get through them, understand them. You need a time to read the question, understand what the question is asking you, and go through the answer choices and select the one that is best appropriate to the answer, the question being asked. And you also have to mark your answers. So the time pacing, you usually have 1.2 or 3 minutes per question. It is very time tight, okay? So in order to not waste your time, as I just mentioned, you have to understand the prompt or stimulus thoroughly before answering, okay? You do not want to read the stimulus again to double check that you fully got the point from the stimulus, okay? So at the first try, you're going to understand the question's point question's point thoroughly and correctly by thoroughly going over and understanding the stimulus, which will allow you to understand the question's point. Again, I usually recommend using a minute per question, a minute or 1.2 minutes. And similar to SAT, if you just cannot find a good answer for now, just skip for now, okay? It really wouldn't hurt. Because let's say you got stuck in one question and you pretty much spend like 5 minutes struggling, then you're essentially throwing away the chance to answer 4 or 5 other questions that you're confident with. Okay, so you are pretty much giving up those potential chances or opportunities for getting other questions correct. So if you believe that you're stuck in a question, just skip for now. Okay, you got a lot of time, just chill and try to get through things that you do know and are confident with, and then go to the questions that you're, quite confused with, not confident with, all right? So, use your time-taking strategies. And I always recommend this to leave 5 to 10 minutes for a final check and marking. It's usually very easy to mess marking up when you're in a nervous, anxious situation of a test taking. Students usually mess it up, all right? So you want to make sure that you leave a good 10 minutes for you to mark your answers, ensure that you marked it correctly, and you want to final check some questions that you're actually confused about. That's why I consider AP Biology one of those time-paced exam, because from those 90 minutes that you have to deduct around 10 minutes for final check and marking, and that leaves actually around 1.1 minute per question, but you have to read the stimulus, understand the point, eliminate choices. So it is a very challenging exam, right? So use these strategies. And usually when the College Board creates the MCQ exam, so AP Biology exam has 4 answer choices, and test makers are usually going to design the answer choices that such that the 4 answer choices contain 2 wrong choices that are irrelevant. So those 2 choices will not make sense. They're like just wrong out of your automatic insight. But do be careful that those question choices may be a fact. They may be correct factually, but they're just irrelevant, not appropriate to the context of the question, okay? So 2 choices are always the wrong choices that are just out at an instant sight. And you have and you have the good old distractor, okay? So this answer choice is created so that the College Board can actually distinguish who knows and do not know the point or the concept being asked by the question. So this distractor question, or good old distractor, sounds correct. They sound relevant and correct. They might be an answer, but be careful that these distractors do not really answer the exact prompt that the question is asking about. In comparison, the correct choice answers this prompt and is relevant. Usually, the distractor is a sweet one, so usually students will just pick, just for their peripheral satisfaction, but actually that is not the point. So always distractor is off by a word or a tone, okay? So be careful with this. They do not really answer the exact prompt. They're like 5% wrong and 95% correct. But for correct choice, they answer the prompt and it's relevant. So the sucky thing is that correct choices are usually 20% correct and 80% ambiguous, okay? So one tip is that whenever you find something that is off, that is just incorrect out of your instant sight from these distractors, they're just wrong, okay? They're not going to answer the question that is incorrect, okay? Always choose the voice that is relevant and is answering the prompt, although it may sound a bit ambiguous. So let's look at an example. This is from US history. I made this question myself, but I think this is a good practice of what you can prepare for the, tactics of solving AP Bio exam. So let's just take a look into it. This excerpt is adapted from United States Declaration of Independence, originally published in 1779 and 6, and drafted by Thomas Jefferson, Benjamin Franklin, and others. So this is our good old Declaration of Independence given as a stimulus of this question. Let's just think, again, I said always, when you're given the prompt, try to understand what the question is actually asking you. Get the question's point by just looking at the stimulus. So this question gave the Declaration of Independence as the stimulus, meaning that it's going to test us about the Revolutionary Era. I'll have to read through the coded part to understand what part of Revolutionary Era it is talking about and what aspect of it. But we, generally by common knowledge, know that the U.S., the founding fathers declared independence from Great Britain around this era because they were taxed heavily. They went by the motto, no representation, no taxation. They're just mad at King George III. So they decided to overthrow the crown and make a new country. And they drafted this declaration to officially declare themselves separate from Great Britain now as a newborn country. Okay, so that's just the basic point that I can grasp from the stimulus. So see how I, garnered so many information just by reading a sentence from the stimulus. That's a skill that you need to develop. You need a knowledge of the concept and a logical flow to develop this, okay? So that's why you gotta learn the concept. So the stimulus goes, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So this is one of the most famous excerpts from the Declaration of Independence. So let's just think about it again. What's the point of the stimulus? So the reason that they gave this, part amongst this long, good old Declaration of Independence is that they want to ask us about a certain point. They want to get us to the certain aspect of the Declaration. So around these eras, it was the Enlightenment, and people started to have this general idea that all men are equal. There is no such thing as the king and the subject. And they actually started to think about liberalism, stuff like unalienable rights, that all men are given certain rights from their birth, regardless of their race, gender, nationality, etc. And they all have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, okay? Around Enlightenment era, when people started to think about liberalism, the idea of freedom, liberty, personal rights, all that, and when they actually started to go against the idea of absolute monarchy. So we have this general knowledge. Let's go ahead and answer the question. A. So the question asked, the quote above is a likely response to, so we have to think in which context this statement was spoken in the Declaration. A. Increasing demand for workers' rights and security during Industrial Revolution. This is one of those two choices that is just automatically incorrect, correct? So they're like correct. They're like factually correct, meaning that there was an increasing demand for workers' rights and security during Industrial Revolution. It was a correct thing, but it is just irrelevant to the context that it is being asked. So that is automatically incorrect. And we have elevated understanding of universal equality during Enlightenment era. Whew, that's actually the thing that I was thinking of and was just brainstorming and just outlining when I was reading the stimulus. So this likely be an answer, okay? Let's just leave it as potentially correct answer. And C goes, intolerable taxation to American colonists by King George III of Great Britain. So this is a distractor that you have to be careful of. True, the declaration was written in response to, those unreasonable taxation by King George III. But is this specific prompt, this certain line from the declaration, actually a response to that thing? Is it actually a response to increased taxation versus the elevated understanding of universal equality? I would say no, because although the declaration is, against King George III's unreasonable taxation, this line in particular is a representation of how Americans changed their understanding about freedom, liberalism and individual rights during the Enlightenment era. So again, be very careful with these kind of answers. They do make sense, okay? They are a distractor. Do note that they sound very, very correct, and they might actually interact with the stimulus, but it doesn't actually answer that precise point the question is trying to get to, all right? The final choice, D, abolitionist response to slavery before the Civil War. No, that is just irrelevant, okay? So this is how you answer the typical AP Bio question, although I did bring up an example from US history. So again, understand the prompt and try to think of how you'd answer the question based on a prompt. Go through the answer choices. Two choices are just irrelevant to the context, although they may be correct. And distractor, be very careful. They might be very sweet and luring, but they actually do not answer the exact prompt the question is trying to get you to, right? Cool.